So I Lay My Life Down For You is finally out. This is the latest album from experimental hip-hop legend JPEGMAFIA, an album which has been in a perpetual rollout for about a year and a half now. I've been very cautiously optimistic for this one. On one hand, Peggy has been on a winning streak for 6 years now, putting out some of my favorite hip-hop albums of all time. On the other hand, his behavior in the past year or so has been obnoxious to say the least. If you aren't in the know, earlier this year, Peggy worked on Kanye West's Vultures album. Quality of the album aside, this caused major backlash for obvious reasons. Peggy's music has been adamantly and outspokenly against fascism for as long as he's been JPEGMAFIA, so working with a genuine neo-Nazi should not be ignored. It sends the message that fascism is okay as long as it's someone that I like, and makes Peggy out to be a real hypocrite. And when receiving any sort of backlash online, he would throw a temper tantrum and completely miss the point. It's safe to say that Peggy's reputation as a political artist is permanently damaged due to this. While it wasn't enough for me to not enjoy his previous work, I was very cautious going into a new JPEGMAFIA album. Something immediately noticeable about this album is how structurally different it is from previous JPEGMAFIA albums. Where other Peggy albums had 18 to 20 tracks, with many of them being very short, I Lay Down My Life only has 14, but lasts a very similar amount of time to previous releases. That feeling of a more accessible JPEGMAFIA is felt throughout the entire experience. There's no beat here as eclectic or insane as what you'll see on Veteran or the Danny Brown collab. This is a shift that I don't really have too big an issue with on paper. LP was a big step towards a more accessible Peggy, and that's my favorite album of his thus far. However, here, there are moments that I find just pure forgettable. Oftentimes, the beats just feel average, which is the opposite of what I expect from a JPEGMAFIA album, and very rarely, it sounds bad. The future choruses of New Black History seem to be working against the beat, and it sounds more like a YouTube shitpost than it does a JPEGMAFIA song. The beat overall is just annoying, and that high-pitched beeping in the end is headache-inducing. Honestly, this may be my least favorite JPEGMAFIA song, though keep in mind I haven't heard Black Ben Carson in full yet. But that doesn't mean there aren't production highlights. The most notable addition this album makes to Peggy's production is the full introduction of rock instrumentals. This sound was toyed with on previous tracks, for example, End Credits, but it takes center stage here. In my eyes, Opener, I Scream This in the Mirror Before I Interact with Anyone is the peak of this album's playing with rock instrumentation. Other highlights include Vulgar Display of Power, which reads like a nu metal song in all the right ways, and the second half of Jihad Joe, which is definitely the hardest this album goes. That song's less intense first half also sounds excellent with its psychedelic synthesizers. The album version of single Don't Rely on Other Men is fantastic, and the added instrumentation makes it feel much more grand. Also, that song samples Succession, which is the best TV show of all time, thank you for asking. Unfortunately, this rock sound has to share the spotlight with more subtle and frankly boring instrumentals. Not that all non-rock sounds on the album are bad, Loop It and Leave It has the grandiose feel I have the feeling Peggy wants the whole album to have, but here I feel it really works. The strains in the back half of this song are awesome. The brass in JPEG Ultra is amazing, especially with the Denzel Curry feature, a feature which overshadows Peggy, which is pretty unheard of on his previous solo albums. Which leads me to Peggy's presence on the mic. I've always felt how Peggy says things is more important than what he's actually saying. His manic vocal energy, to me, is a prime aspect of his music. However, for the most part, it seems like he's on autopilot here. Even on my favorite tracks on this album, he doesn't seem to have that same energy he's had before. If anything, I was more excited to hear Peggy go more low-key on some tracks because it feels different. Not that he's never exciting, there are some moments that are very exciting. The scream he does on Ex-Military before the track blows up is fantastic. His voice cracking and oddball voices a minute into lead single Sin Miedo is one of the best vocal deliveries I've heard in a rap song in recent memory. The sassy tone he takes on the opener is very satisfying. He certainly still has an energy to him, but he rarely maintains it a whole song. The problem to me is that with the heaviness of the new rock instrumentation, the energy of the beats heavily overshadow Peggy. And when a song is more toned down, it feels like Peggy is skipping ahead of the low energy of the beat. There's hardly a point where the energy of the production and the energy of Peggy himself sync up. Also, it's obvious this album is a shift to a more introspective sound outside of the highbrow bangers we're used to. However, Peggy's tone of voice hasn't shifted in the slightest. Compared to my criticisms of some production choices which stem from Peggy trying new things, which I do commend, the vocal issues I have come from him sticking to his guns to a harmful degree. Lyrically, I'll be totally honest, I never listened to the JPEGMAFIA for the lyrics. I've always just come for the intense presence on the mic and the remarkably unique production style. For the most part, this is the usual Peggy affair lyrically, some notably funny and witty moments here and there. I do, however, have to shout out this album's closer, I Recovered From This, which may very well be the best JPEGMAFIA song ever lyrically. Peggy really opens up here about how he may have acted poorly in past relationships and his own struggles with mental health. It's written incredibly well and proves that the one aspect of this album that feels like a real step up from previous Peggy material is the lyrics. I honestly wish he took a whole deep dive into this introspective sound, but I'll take this song. It may be the best on the album and could go toe-to-toe with some of my favorite, more modest-sounding tracks on previous JPEGMAFIA albums. Overall, I can't help but feel like Peggy is caught between wanting to evolve and also getting too comfortable with his sound. For an artist as consistently experimental and engaging as he is, it's a bad gray area to be in. Not to mention, many of his more aggressive and braggadocious lyrics do seem much more wimpy and petty now, with his online presence becoming more and more childish with each passing day. A lot of people may be starting to think I hate this album, but don't get me wrong, there are quite a few songs I really do love and think are on par with his best material. However, the amount of tracks I simply don't care for makes this a lower point in a discog which otherwise has only gone up. I'm going to give I Lay Down My Life For You a score of 7 out of 10, and that is all.